We're here now again talking about the Bible, and I'm going to talk about the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible. I mentioned chapter 1 the last time about the creation of the world and that. But in chapter 2 and 3, you just have a focus on our first parents as they're known, Adam and Eve. And the Bible isn't the only book that talks about the first human being, if you like. There were other ancient texts talked about the first human being that ever was as well. And Adam and Eve, that story is fascinating for Jewish people, but then also for Christians. And chapter 2 really talks about the garden, a beautiful garden in the east, it's said. And if you go to the Middle East or the Far East, people have a great interest in gardens and flowers, and they really have beautiful gardens and always have had, and they've had that in the past as well. And the word paradise really is an old Persian word for a beautiful garden, and we still use the word paradise. So God created this kind of a paradise, and he put the man there, and he created the woman then, because one part of that chapter tells us how God sent all the animals and brought them to the first man, Adam, and he gave a name to them all, but he didn't find a companion suitable for him. And so God put him into a deep sleep. And then from the man's rib, he fashioned, he artistically made, like a sculptor, I suppose. He artistically made a woman. And then she was a companion, and the man is supposed to have said, "This is flesh of my flesh and bones of my bones." And she will be called woman because she was taken from man. So then the next thing God did was he told them they could eat all the fruit of the trees and everything. But he did put a restriction on them, and the knowledge of good and evil, they weren't allowed to touch it. And there was also a tree called the Tree of Life. Now, the Tree of Life makes sense if you think about it, because the one living thing on earth, on this earth, that can live theoretically forever is a tree. We know and we've heard of the giant redwoods in the States of America, which have lasted there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And there's one actually, they made a road through it, a motorway or a road goes through it. So a tree can live forever if conditions are right. So you can see why they would come up with a Tree of Life then, because there are trees here in Killassa and everywhere that were around in somebody's father's time, and they were around in the grandfather's time, and possibly around the great-grandfather's time, and they've been there a lot longer than us. Their lifespan is a lot longer than ours. So that's why the Tree of Life is such an interesting thing. Anyway, the man and the woman, they were tempted by a serpent. You're into kind of mythology, and you're into unusual storytelling where animals speak, and the serpent spoke to the man and said, and spoke to the woman and said to her, what did God tell you that you couldn't eat anything? And eventually she said, yes, he did. And then the woman and the man were tricked, if you like, and they ate the tree from the knowledge of good and evil, that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then they realized they were naked and they hid themselves, and something was brought into the world, and we can call it shame or guilt, or we can call it a whole lot of different things. They actually hid from God. So whatever happened somehow affected their relationship with God. And St. Augustine then, but other Christians like St. Paul as well talked about this, that all sinned in Adam. This was the thing that St. Paul said, that whatever happened when they ate that, or whatever took place. Now, remember that story isn't historically true in the same way as what we read in the papers today, but it's theologically true. So it's a truth that is, people are trying to express it using a story. And of course, the Bible is full of stories, and that's one of the great stories. And of course, Adam and Eve hid themselves, and God came after them, and then realized that something happened. And one of the sad things in that story in chapter 3 is that God kind of expelled them from the Garden of Eden or from the paradise, which the Christian God, we talk about a God of compassion and a God of love and so on. Sometimes it's a bit hard to square that God that we believe in with this God who kind of kicked them out, if you like. But we have to remember that there were other texts and other stories written at that time of a similar vein. And what the whole story is trying to express is, what is wrong with us as human beings? There is something profoundly wrong with us. And we always see that every day of the week, the violence in our society, maybe people being attacked, people being knifed, people being killed, somebody randomly shooting children in a school. And of course then maybe on a larger scale, a war like what's going on in the Ukraine and the whole terrible tragedy in Gaza as well. And there are other wars going on in Sudan and Africa that we don't ever hear in the news as well. So there's something wrong with us as human beings. There's actually something wrong. And in a relationship as well, even among friends, jealousy comes in and people begin to not trust each other and doubt each other and be suspicious of each other, fall out with each other, and all those conflicts, they're going on all the time. And within our own hearts, there's a whole conflict going on, even with ourselves. And we're trying to be good and trying to always do the right thing, and something happens then, and it triggers something in us, and we turn a bit nasty and we give out. So relationships are very flawed all the time, and there's a whole struggle there in our relationships with each other and with ourselves. Our relationship with God as well it's very delicate and it's very fragile. And we know that our mental health, we talk nowadays about our mental health. Now our mental health is very fragile, all of us. And some people have a terribly fragile mental health, and anything can happen and things affect them, and they get depressed, and they may even imagine everybody to be against them. So then if they meet someone who maybe isn't very nice to them, it proves what they believe about everybody and so on. So our human nature is flawed. There's a fault. It's like if you buy a new car, you can buy a lovely new car, and it's all the latest mod cons and everything in it, and a lovely sat nav, and computer is controlling it, and everything going well. But then when the car's out for a few months and after being newly created, the company tell you, oh, there's a flaw in the car. There's a design flaw in the car. So you have to bring it back to the garage and they have to fix it if they're able. And it might take a bit of money. And they might have to even withdraw a particular car and say, no, it's dangerous. We have to redo parts of it. And there's something in our nature, in our human nature, that's flawed. And so the tendency, as the Jewish people say, the tendency to sin, this kind of a desire to do the wrong thing rather than the right thing. And St. Paul talks about that. He says, I know what the right thing is. I know exactly what it is, but I still want to do the wrong thing. And we even see that in little children, and teachers especially see that, the children, and they're all lovely and everything, but unless you watch them, unless you monitor them, unless you keep an eye on them, a cheeky one will do something which is wrong, and also try and bully others or whatever else. So we live in a very flawed world, and that's on the level just of ourselves as individuals, but also as communities, and as a church even. As a church we're very flawed as well, and the church has sins, and child abuse being one of the ones that's constantly talked about, but there are other flaws as well. I suppose the desire to dominate, which priests and bishops had, and the desire to kind of impose our will on other people. It's a temptation, I think, for any priest or any parish priest or anybody like that. Power is a very strange thing. And it's not just in the church, but politics is the same. Some people get power politically in a country and try to impose their will on everybody else and kind of push and shove everybody around. And really that's what chapter 2 and 3 of Genesis is asking the question. Why are we so flawed? what's wrong with us? What's wrong with us that we're kind of tending to do the wrong thing, and that there's some kind of evil in the world, and not everybody is really good. And of course, a child, when they're young and innocent, naturally believes that everybody is good, and you can trust everybody. And yet parents have to tell their children, oh no, you can't really trust everybody. A stranger comes along and starts giving you sweets or whatever, you have to be careful. You could be kidnapped, or you could be attacked, anything could be done to you. So we live in a very flawed world, and it's like a tree, and there's knots in the tree when you're sawing a piece of wood, and we're made of warped wood. We're made of wood, but it's warped sometimes. There's a twist in the human nature. So I suppose all peoples have discovered that, not just the Bible, not just the book of Genesis, but that was a discovery that was made. And we know it's there, and I suppose the Bible is trying to tell us, why did this happen? And then the story of Adam and Eve and what happened to them is an attempt to explain why it happened. And then I suppose the rest of the Bible will actually say, well, God tried to sort this out. He tried to sort out this fault. Now, some people call it original sin, and that's one of the names the church gave it for a long time, that something went wrong very early on in the world. And the early chapters of Genesis talk about what went wrong. And later on, God did try to sort that out. And we talk about salvation then later on, with Jesus coming and so on. So there's a whole story there about Adam and Eve. And again, it's not literally true, and scientifically it wouldn't be true, but theologically, in terms of the message that's in it, it's a great message. I suppose to be aware that the world is flawed, and that I'm flawed as well. No matter how good I think I am, I'm still flawed. And the tendency would be for me to go easily astray. And so we have to be careful. I suppose that's why we need God. And remember, as I said, Adam and Eve, they ran away and hid themselves from God. In many ways, we do that too today. Many people who have kind of run away from God, if you like, don't want to have anything to do with Him. Maybe something happened that they cannot forgive God for, because all kinds of things happen to us, and people are angry at God too, and so on. And then people have done things wrong and they feel guilty about them and so on. But it's a great story because it's an attempt to explain and describe the way the world is. And we are, as I say, prone to all kinds of temptations and all kinds of weaknesses. And it's great to be aware of that, how fragile I am, and how fragile every relationship I have with everybody else, how fragile it is. And something happens and something goes wrong, and then people never speak again. And they lose faith in each other, they don't trust each other, and so on and so forth. And that's why the book of Genesis is a fantastic book, because it kind of raises these questions. It doesn't find it easy to answer them. It tells stories in an attempt to answer them. But they're fantastic stories. And so much has been written about chapter 2 and 3 of Genesis that I could go on forever and ever and ever about it, and interpretations as to what it means and so on. But the best thing maybe is to get you to read chapter 2 and chapter 3 of Genesis yourself. Very early on in the Bible, the very first book, chapter 2 and 3. Well worth reading it, well worth looking at it, reflecting on it, thinking about it, and asking God to enlighten you as you read it, to see what message it might have. Because every time we read those pages, God is speaking to us and giving us some kind of a message and helping us to see the world as a strange place, a fantastic place, a beautiful place, but certainly a very strange place. And in a sad way, a dangerous place too. And we ourselves, because of our tendency to do the wrong thing, we're incredibly dangerous as well. And everything is very fragile. Remember that. So I think I'll leave it at that now. And thanks very much. And we'll continue on with some more stories later on. Thank you.